Families of the hostages who were released following last week's massacre in Afghanistan's northern province of Sar-e-Pol recount their trauma.
The government shouldn't make us coffins and take our funerals, but it has to ensure our security. What kind of government is this? We are massacred.
They forcibly took my son from my wife and killed him. We couldn't even find his body, and we had been assured by the government that the security was maintained in this place.
The ones who were killed were all civilians with no weapons. They killed my old uncle, who was suffering from diabetes. They killed whoever faced them on their way.
At least 60 people, including women and children, were killed in the mass killing in the Mirza Walang district. This after the Taliban militants captured a mainly Shia village on Saturday. Witnesses say the militants went from house to house, shooting villagers. They also took a number of civilians behind a hill and shot them. The assailants, bearing Taliban and Daesh banners, are said to have kidnapped nearly 50 girls and women. The Afghan Defense Ministry says the operation to retake the valley has started. The failure of the government and NATO forces to respond in time has outraged the residents of the flashpoint area. Meanwhile, the Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council has condemned the deadly raid on a Shia village in Afghanistan. Ali Shamkhani offered condolences to his Afghan counterpart, as well as the Afghan nation and government. He blamed the presence of U.S. forces for the growing insecurity in the region. Shamkhani stressed that putting an end to such horrendous acts by Takfiri extremists is only possible through a sincere fight against terrorism and the cooperation of neighboring countries. 60 people, including women and children, were massacred when the Taliban attacked the Mirza Walang village in the northern Sar-e-Pol province on Saturday. Jason Unruhe is a political commentator and analyst who joins us from Ontario. One of the reasons why we see the Taliban in particular, and of course now with the rise of Daesh in Afghanistan, in some sense parallel the Taliban's frustration, and that is against the presence of U.S. forces. They feel like their country is occupied, and that has led to some of the rebellion from them. And the U.S. has come out saying, you know, we're not winning that war. Do you see the presence of U.S. forces as one reason behind what's happening in Afghanistan?
Oh, definitely. The U.S. presence inside of Afghanistan is exacerbating the current problems that already exist. Basically, the presence of the U.S. is not acting like a liberation force because they're not a liberation force. They're an occupation force. They are there to control Afghanistan, particularly its markets and access to resources. There's a great deal of untapped mineral wealth underneath the embattled country that the U.S. is seeking to control. Now, their actions certainly reflect the very nature of their occupation. If this were a humanitarian effort, something designed to protect the Afghan people, it would certainly manifest itself in that way. And that is such a high emphasis on security, protecting civilians, economic development. But we have seen quite the opposite of this. What we've seen is nothing but a straight-out war against the Taliban and now against Daesh as well. The problem is that this manifestation reflects the true nature of the U.S. occupation of Afghanistan, in that it is an attempt to control the country, not liberate the country from any kind of terrorist forces.
And finally and quickly, the most recent news is talk of the confusion from the U.S., of which one of the solutions perhaps that they may be contemplating is privatizing that war and bringing in the famous Blackwater and its mercenaries. Of course, we've seen what happened in Iraq. Why would they think that that would solve perhaps the situation when 16 years of their efforts failed?
Well, I think the reason why they think it's going to work is due to how these private contractors work. Blackwater, which now goes under the name XE, is the way private contractors work in the military is that they are not held accountable to the same standards that actual government military forces are. They're not bound by the same ethics, etc. They're certainly still bound by the law, but they are not bound by the same oversight that government forces are. They can act quite freely outside of the U.S. Army Code of Justice. They can act outside the stated ethics of the U.S. military. a lot of their actions don't count towards anything official that takes place. For example, any contractor that is killed in a conflict isn't counted towards the official stats because they're not an official member of the military, and thus any act they commit is also not officially recorded. In other words, they can do whatever it is that they feel is right outside the bounds of the law, and the U.S. military is not to be held accountable for what they do because they're not U.S. military forces. They're just contractors. This removes the legal liability of the U.S. government for crimes that are committed and places it on the contractors, who are quite often almost impossible to find once the actual incident is over. This is the U.S. blatantly going forward to do things that it knows are illegal in order to carry out its interests, but maintains a kind of a gloss where they have a plausible deniability about what the actual contractors are doing.
Thank you, Jason Unruhe, political commentator and analyst from Ontario.